Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by MedSchoolCoach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
All right, everyone. So welcome to another session of the PreMed Virtual Summit. My name is Max with PreMed Made Simple, and I'm really excited for our guest today. So we have with us Kathryn Henshaw, who's a master MCAT tutor with MedSchoolCoach. And in case you need any other further reason to trust the advice that she's about to give you, she scored the 99th percentile on her own MCAT. So welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you so much for having me, Max. I'm really excited to be here today and to mentor all of you for the MCAT exam.
So today we're going to talk about full-length exams. And so we're really going to cover a lot of ground. Kathryn's going to give us a nice introduction to what exactly a full-length exam is. We'll talk about the exam itself, and then we'll talk about what you should be doing in terms of reviewing the exam itself. So Kathryn, let's get started with just the very basics here. What exactly are the components to a full-length MCAT exam?
Yes, so the full-length exam is an exam that mimics the MCAT exactly. So when you're taking a full-length exam, you can expect almost an 8-hour morning, so starting at 8 a.m. and ending around 4 p.m. So it's quite a long day, so that's something you should be prepared for. When you're taking a full-length exam, you get all the breaks, just like the regular MCAT, and you also will be taking all 4 sections that are a part of the regular MCAT exam. So starting with chemistry and physics, moving on to CARS, and then finishing out with biochem and psych-soc. So that's the structure of a full-length exam, and it's designed to be exactly like the MCAT and exactly like test day.
And so the actual interface for the systems that you use, do they actually tell you things like, okay, it's time to take a break now, and that sort of reminders?
Yes, so once you finish your section and the time is up, the screen will pop up and let you know, hey, you can take an optional 15-minute break if it's after the first section or after the biochem section, or you get a 30-minute break after CARS. So it'll let you know on the interface when your breaks are.
So when would you recommend that students take their very first full-length exam?
Oh, okay. So very first full length, I always recommend students take a full length before they even get started studying for the MCAT. And this should be a diagnostic test to see how much progress you have to make to get your goal score. So it's a very important tool to take a full length right at the beginning so you have a starting point.
And so I imagine that's like kind of frustrating, right? If you take the MCAT on no preparation, because you're just not going to know the answers to a lot of questions, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. There'll be things that you're kind of kicking yourself that you remember from your science classes, but not quite well enough to answer the question. And it's an interesting experience. So you'll definitely come out of it with a renewed sense of motivation to learn the things that you didn't quite get on that first practice test.
Got it. So what really is the point of that diagnostic then? If you're testing yourself on concepts that you probably haven't reviewed in, 2 or 3 years, what's the point of it?
So the point of it is the MCAT is really a test of critical analysis. So it's to gauge your ability to interact with a test like the MCAT. So how do you respond to critical thinking questions? If you're already responding pretty well to them, you probably have less of a distance to go than someone who's starting out with a very low score on certain sections. So it's really just to see how good of an MCAT test taker you naturally are. And then, of course, you'll improve once you start learning the content of the exam.
Okay. And I know there are a lot of, if you search for full-length exams on the internet, then you see some specific exams that are marketed as diagnostic tests. Would you recommend actually having your first exam be one of those diagnostics, or should you just take any old full-length exam?
That is a good question. So for most students, sitting down for 8 hours is a pretty grueling day, and you don't have that training to feel ready to sit down for 8 hours just yet. But I recommend that you do take a true full-length exam as your diagnostic. Personally, I took a shorter exam. I took one of those diagnostics, and it's hard to predict a score from one of those. So instead of having 60 questions, you have 30 questions per section, and that really decreases the predictability of the exam. So a full length will give you a superior analysis of how you're doing, and then you can go from there.
So are all the diagnostics they can find online, are they all like half lengths or like 1/3 lengths, or do they actually make full length diagnostic MCAT exams?
So most of the exams that they'll market as being full length won't be called a diagnostic test. It'll just be labeled as a practice test. So what you can do is take any practice test as your diagnostic.
So after you before you've even started, I mean, this is like before you've begun day one of studying, you say, take that diagnostic. So it kind of gives you a sense of where you're at, tells you how good you are at general MCAT study methods and how much progress you're going to need to make. So now let's kind of dive into, sorry, what were you going to say?
Sorry. I was just saying, yes, exactly.
Okay. And then so now let's kind of dive into, you've started studying. What's the role of full-length exams once you've actually started studying for the MCAT?
Okay, so the role of the full-length exam does vary according to where you are in your study schedule. So for most students, they schedule their studies where they're reading the books first, and then they're doing practice questions as they get closer to the exam. So for students who are still reading their MCAT books, it's not as necessary to take frequent practice tests. And I really only recommend doing one practice test a month or one practice test every 3 or 4 weeks. And this is because you're not going to see that much improvement between practice tests if you take them more frequently than that during your book reading. And it takes away time from doing other valuable activities at that point.
Okay. So particularly earlier on in your studying, that's when you focus on content review, question bank, stuff like that. And then so on the flip side, when you start getting closer to your test day, is that when you shift more towards full lengths?
Yeah, so this is when I recommend that students take a full length exam every week. And for the 4 or 5 weeks leading up to test day, I recommend that you solely take the AAMC practice tests. So you should really save those and take one per week leading up to the exam.
Got it. Okay. And so when you're taking these exams closer towards the MCAT itself, what is the goal of those exams? Is it to get an idea of where you're at, to get a better idea of, like pacing? Like, what's your main goal with those?
So the main goal for the exams that are getting closer to test day, that's of course to see where you are, to make sure that you don't need to push your test date. But more importantly, this is your best learning tool at this point. So these practice tests give you a wealth of information about your ability to time yourself, your ability to strategize, and also your content knowledge. So all of those things are vitally important to understand where you stand and then be able to troubleshoot if you're missing in one of those areas.
Do you think, like, say that I'm about to take my MCAT in, a week or two, so I'm taking a couple of AAMC exams. Do you feel like the score that I get on those practice exams is a fairly indicative score of what I'll get on the actual MCAT?
Yeah, so typically your last practice exam you'll take will be the last AAMC, so AAMC 3. And in my own students, I've seen that they've scored within 1 to 2 points of that final exam on the real MCAT.
So it's a great predictor.
Yeah, so it's a very reliable test, and it predicts how well you'll do on test day for sure.
And that's just, again, specifically AAMC test number 3 that you find is that really good predictor.
Yes, but also the other AAMC tests. So you could really take AAMC practice test 1, 2, or 3 and have it be very close to your score.
Okay, so it's not that 3 is more predictive, it's just the next one in the order, basically.
Yeah, it's just usually the one that students take last. So that's why it's the most predictive. But you could take them in any order. So
let's kind of look at maybe the negative side of the situation. So say that I take this exam a week before my MCAT and maybe don't do as well as I wanted. Do you have any advice on how you should decide whether to push back your date or maybe just attributing it to a bad day or something like that?
Yeah, so when this happens to students of mine, the first question I ask is, did you run out of time? That's a big indicator of, is this test an anomaly? Because if you did run out of time, that's going to significantly bring down your score.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you took the test again and you didn't run out of time, you probably would have done a lot better. So when deciding to push your test, you should consider, did I run out of time, and maybe would I have done better if I didn't? But also look at the types of mistakes you're making. Are they big content gap mistakes? Are they strategy mistakes? Are they silly mistakes? And make sure that you feel like you could get all of the questions you got wrong right on test day. If you have that confidence, it could be possible to keep your test day, but in general, if you're more than 5 points out from your goal score, you're probably not going to make it within just a few weeks like that.
So if you're 5 points below your goal score without any of these crazy extraneous situations like running out of time or a fire alarm went off in the building or something like that, then that's when you should start to rethink about it.
Yeah, and that's a really soft number. So for some students, they might be able to improve 5 points in 2 weeks, but for the majority of students, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the student here. So take that advice with a grain of salt and make sure that you're ideally within 1 to 2 points of your goal score leading up to test day.
So kind of taking a step back, I guess this is kind of like a more general question, and then I'm going to dive into some specific practice some full-length exam questions based on that. So how long, I know this is very variable, but let's say I'm not working a full-time job, I'm dedicating all my time to studying the MCAT. How long would you recommend that a student studies for the MCAT?
Yes, so this is more of a question about hours than it is about the months or the days, because it really depends on how many hours you're able to put in.
Okay.
A successful student usually puts in about 500 hours. And most students who are studying full-time can get those in within 2 to 3 months. But students working full-time will need a lot longer to do really well in their exam.
Okay. So let's hypothetically say that I'm going to put in my 500 hours over 3 months. Can we kind of break it down month by month in how many full-length exams you think I should be taking each month?
Yeah, so I would probably recommend that a student studying for 3 months, that they save all of their AMC tests for the last month. So there are four full-length exams, and you could use all 4 of those full-length AMC exams during the last month. So that leaves us with 2 months of other tests. And I'd recommend that students take them every 3 to 4 weeks. So probably within that time, you'll take 2, 3, maybe 4 practice tests, not including the diagnostic.
And so we've kind of been talking about, of course, we've been talking about the full-length exams. We've talked about the AAMC ones are the gold standard, right? Those are the best. Do you have like maybe a next best? Which one do you recommend after the AAMC exams?
So besides the AAMC exams, I prefer the next step for the third-party exams. They have CAR sections and psych-soc sections that are better at mimicking the exam than the other test prep companies. And their biochem and chem phys sections tend to be a tiny bit harder, which does benefit you, but the scores are never really going to be as predictive as you want them to be for test day. So you have to keep in mind that some of their sections are harder, some are predictive, but overall you can't really extrapolate how you'll do on test day from any third-party test, really.
Got it. Okay. So like you were saying before, the AAMC is very predictive, but any of these third-party ones, no matter what they are not going to be as predictive.
Yes, unfortunately so. So we only have 4 chances to really see where we are in terms of our MCAT score, which is it's difficult.
Yeah, especially waiting till the very end to take those, you know? You have a lot of question marks for your first, 2 months of studying.
Yes, I think any student who's studied for the MCAT will tell you about those feelings. It is stressful, but once you start seeing your AMC score, everything starts to fall into place for most people, and it's a nice feeling.
And so AMC has the 4 exams. How many does Next Step offer?
To my knowledge, Next Step offers 10 full-length exams. I do believe that they offer one for free, but I haven't looked in on that in a while. So we'll have to have the students find that out for themselves. Yeah.
I'm sure it's always changing too, as they change whatever their marketing ideas and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not really affiliated with the company. I just used their practice materials when I was studying for my exam. So I'm pretty familiar with them.
And all these full-length exams, you have to pay for them, right? You can't get any free ones anywhere?
To my knowledge, every test prep company does have some sort of free trial or maybe a free diagnostic test. So it depends on the company. But if you wanted to save money, I'm sure there are multiple practice tests that are free. But of course, remember that each test prep company has some good things about their tests and some bad things about their tests.
Yeah. And especially, so next step has however many they have, we'll just say it's around 10 or something like that. And then AMC has 4. 14 should be sufficient, right, for your study period?
Oh, yes. Actually, 14 is more than sufficient. And this is a problem that I see some students run into, where it becomes a competition for themselves of how many full lengths can I take before test day. And it's great that you're able to sit down for 8 hours over multiple tests, but in terms of your score, it's actually going to benefit you more to learn content or answer practice questions and really dive into your issues rather than just brute force taking practice tests leading up to test day.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and MedSchoolCoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.